What up, everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the State of Modern. I'm Jędrek, and today I want to talk about this exciting new modern that is upon us. As you probably know, on the last Monday, Wizards issued a new bannings for modern. They've banned 5 cards, which are Uro, Titan of Nature's Wrath, Field of the Dead, Mystic Sanctuary, Tybalt's Trickery, and Simeon's Spirit Guide. So, I don't want to talk about bans for too long because I've already have enough content for today's video and I don't want to make it too lengthy. But I think bans are pretty good. I would do a few stuff differently, like I would see some unbans. I would like to see how Mystic Sanctuary performs without Uro in the format, but I won't lose any sleep over either no unbans or Sanctuary ban. So just let's move on to how I perceive the metagame will look like in the coming months. So my metagame have 4 tiers. There's tier 1, which is what I believe will be the best decks with the best qualities, which are like they're all fast, very resilient, and adaptable to how the things will go. Then we have tier 1.5 or 1.5, which is basically strong decks that are decent-ish plus into tier 1. So you can have a good matchup against a tier 1 deck, but you're not as inherently strong, or you are a good deck with an acceptable matchup against tier 1s, or you are good against one of them, but bad against the other one. So spoiler alert, there are 2 tier 1s decks in my opinion. Then we have tier 2s, which are still strong decks, but they aren't great into either of these. And here's a caveat that I haven't played all these decks. I haven't played most of them, honestly. So I have to take it with a grain of salt. And I think most of these decks are interchangeable between tier 1.5 and tier 2. And this is just how I view them personally at this point. Then we have But Until Proven Otherwise, which are decks that are for some reason not good enough, I think, now in the modern, but I might be wrong. I will dive a bit deeper into it once I'm there. Then I will go over a checklist in which I include some stuff that I think is important right now and influence how you build your decks. And then I have my proposition for the metagame that is upon us currently. So tier 1 is Red-Black Prowess and Green-White Heliod. Red-Black Prowess is basically Death's Shadow. You can call it however you want. I've seen Prowess, I've seen Death Shadow, I've seen just Lurus. This is the Death Shadow Scourge of the Skyclaves deck that has been around for a couple of months now, ever since Zendikar Rising released, and people started playing Scourge of the Skyclaves right besides their Death Shadows. And I think both of these decks, as I said before, are very fast, resilient, adaptable. They were very good before bans, and now they basically haven't lost any cards. I think Red-Black Prowess is generally pretty close / favored against control decks, depending on how the control deck looks like, but it was pretty bad versus Uro. It has a pretty bad time against Uro, so even though like the Red-Black has what some people likes to call positional advantage versus control decks, you still wasn't very well equipped to beat Uro, so I think this matchup wasn't that great for Red-Black. It wasn't by any means bad. You had the good sideboard cards, but you didn't really want to face Uro. As for Green-White Heliod, I think that there will be a lot of red decks in the format, and Heliod is very good into them. Heliod hasn't lost anything in the bannings. I think decks that run Simeon's Spirit Guide were for the most part good against Heliod because they were faster. So yeah, I think Heliod is primed to take over the format alongside Red-Black. And the main thing that stops Heliod for now is probably how miserable it is to play on Modo. And for as long as basically all modern happens on Modo, I think Heliod will be underrepresented. Yeah, basically this. So moving on to tier 1.5. These are my predictions for tier 1.5. So as you can see, there are 8 of them, more or less. These are like 6 decks and 2 categories. So we have Blue Red Prowess, we have Dredge, Hammer Time, Tron, Tribal, good tribal decks for that matter, which mostly I believe is humans and probably elves. I've seen a lot of people playing elves post Kaldheim with the new 2-drop that makes tokens once per turn if an elf enters the battlefield. I think it's called Elvish Warcaller or something like this. And then they're also adopting Realm Walker, which is the shapeshifter that allows you to choose a creature type, and then you can look at the top card of your library and play cards of the chosen type. So it's a very nice card advantage engine for elves. Then we have Storm, we have Burn, and we have Control. Once again, in parentheses, good. So I believe a well-built control deck is pretty good in this field, because as you can see, most of these decks are playing creatures, so control is pretty good at dealing with creatures, and if built for that, obviously. And if you choose your weapons carefully, I think you can succeed with a control deck, even though it's pretty early in the format, and it's not a very easy task to do so. So out of these decks, I think many people think that either Prowess or Hammer Time should be tier 1. I don't think that Blue Red Prowess is that great into Red Black, and I don't think Blue Red Prowess is that great into Heliod. So I wouldn't put it in like tier 1. So I think both Heliod and Red Black are more adaptable and just a bit stronger inherently than Blue Red is, but Blue Red is still a perfectly fine deck, and it's not very far behind tier 1s. And then Hammer Time is a deck that a lot of people hypes, but I think that the problem with Hammer Time is that people are now less taxed on their sideboard because of bannings of Uro and like Seaman Spirit Guide combo decks. You have a lot of free sideboard slots that you had to devote to these 2 archetypes before, and now some of these slots will be devoted to Hammer. And even if Hammer has a close matchup against, for example, like Blue Red Prowess or against Red Black, with 3 or 4 Abrades or whatever other shattered effects you want against them, this matchup isn't probably as strong as it was before. Also, Hammer, I suppose, is pretty good into Heliod, which is why I think that maybe it can sneak up to tier 1, but probably not. Because I assume that the fact that Ink of Nexus can beat Infinite Life is kind of important in the matchup. Haven't played either side myself, so I don't really know. These are all my educated guesses, basically. But yeah, that's about it. So moving on to tier 2. Once again, we have still strong decks that aren't that great into tier 1s, and I believe these are these 8 decks / categories. So there are Deventaxes, Spirits, Mill, and Titan decks. These 4 decks / categories were decks that were better before bannings, either because they had something banned, like Titan decks, or they were good into Uro decks, which I believe Spirits and Mill for sure was good into Uro, and I believe Deventaxes was probably favored as well, and that's why people played it. And if that wasn't the case, then I don't know why people even played Deventaxes before. But I believe with the rise of Lava Dart and red decks in general, Deventaxes will be a bit worse than it was before bannings. Then we have some decks that were much worse before bans, which is Jant mostly, and also Tron in the higher category was another deck that was basically non-existent before bans, and now I believe will be pretty good. And under that we have other red decks, which is like Mono Red Prowess, which is like probably not Zoo. Zoo is probably still pretty bad, but mostly moderate prowess and some adjacent decks to that. Other Thoughtseize decks, which are mostly non-red-black versions of Death Shadow, be it Grixis, be it Jump Death Shadow, be it Mardu, something like this. It also includes other mid-range decks like Mardu, Stoneblade, or whatever. And then we have Control, parenthesis medium, which are the control decks that won't be as well built as the one in the tier above. I don't know which ones will it be, but I assume people with some mediocrely built control decks will land somewhere in tier 2. So as we move forward to But Until Proven Otherwise, in this category I have decks of basically 3 kinds, which are decks that were underpowered before, like other tribal decks. Tribal parenthesis Bat is basically like Merfolk. It's basically every tribal deck aside from humans, elves, spirits, basically. So like Merfolk, like goblins, like whatever else. Maybe goblins are a bit better than I'm giving it credit for, but I don't. As it says, it's bad until proven otherwise. If someone proves to me that goblins is a good playable deck, then I will gladly accept that as a reality. But for now, I have it here. We have bad control decks. So, for example, people that will build decks like 2019 and 20 and the first month of 21 didn't happen, and they were just go back to their Celestial Covenants and stuff. And then we have Belcher and Oops, which are like pretty similar decks. They were both hurt with the bannings of Sim and Spirit Guide. I've seen Sodek playing both of them, and he's kind of high on how Belcher looks right now, not so high on Oops. So I have higher hopes in Belcher, but we'll see. And then we have other Simian Spirit Guides decks, which is mostly Ad Nauseam, which I've been told is dead, even though I've seen some people building versions that revolves way more around Tassa's Oracle and Spoils of the Vault. But once again, we'll see how it goes, and until I'm proven otherwise, then I think it's bad. And then we have everything else, which is basically if you have questions, Jędrek, is deck X good? Where is deck X? Well, deck X is here if I haven't talked about it. There is some possibility I've forgotten about something, like some big group of decks, but I don't think it's that likely. So you can just assume that if a deck wasn't anywhere before, then the deck is in bad until proven otherwise. So with all that, and with how I think that meta will shape up, I usually prepare a checklist for myself on how to build my deck based on the pillars of the format. So the checklist right now, in this order, is small creatures are the most important thing, because tier 1s and tier 2 and tier 1.5 and like good decks usually will play small creatures in this format, be it Heliod, be it Monastery Swiftspear, be it anything else. You need a removal spell early and often against them. Then you have Graveyard Linears. I think Dredge will be very good, or maybe not very good, but good. Then Storm is to some extent a graveyard deck. Basically, you still have to run some form of Grave Hate. And for example, before you didn't really need a Grave Hate in your deck, because in your control deck, that is, because Uro basically was soloing Dredge with Cryptic Loop, and against Storm you just had like a bunch of forces, and you were just strong enough that you didn't need this type of stuff against them. But now I assume you need some Graveyard Hate. Then you have big mana. I think Tron will be better than Titan decks. I've seen a lot of people hyped with Eldrazi-tron. I haven't played Eldrazi-tron myself ever, and I believe I've played very, very little matches with Green Tron, like probably 1 or 2 matches or whatever, but so basically 0. But I still have to give some respect to Big Mana again. And then we have Attrition Wars, which is other mid-range decks, other control decks. Obviously, Red Black Shadow or decks like this have some amount of attrition built into it, but it's not like the matchup isn't about grinding all the time and stuff like this. So I don't think that you really need to play like bad quote-unquote mirror cards. Like a lot of people suggest to me why I'm not playing Shark Typhoon in my control decks. It's so good. Well, it's not very good against good decks, obviously. When you're playing League, you play against a person with a 2018 decks, and then this Shark Typhoon will be good. And sometimes Shark Typhoon will be good against good decks as well, but you can just play cards that are better against these good decks and not gun for like mirror matches or whatever. So basically, don't build your decks with control and mid-range in mind, is what I'm trying to say, for the most part. Obviously, if you are playing control decks, you will have some tools that are like inherently good against these decks, but this shouldn't be your first priority. And here I will show you my blue-black deck that I think is pretty good now, so, well, because I spoiled it. This is the blue-black control list that I think will be pretty good right now. I've played with it for a couple days. I mostly tuned the sideboard to be a bit better, and the main deck was kind of okay in the first place, I think. But here I will perform a short rant about like control decks in general. So first of all, Fatal Push is way better than Path to Exile, and please don't play Path to Exile as your only removal spell. It's just so important to kill turn 1 Swift Spear in this format. It's a bit less important to kill Arbor Elf, but still. And if you play blue-black, you can play Drown in the Lock and Thought Scour without embarrassing yourself, because your opponent won't just randomly mill an Uro or something like this. So you can take care of bigger creatures with Drown in the Lock. Of course, you won't exile them. And of course, you'll still dive to Wormcoil Engine or Thought-Knot Seer or Reality Smasher even from time to time, but you don't need Path to Exile. You can just take care of these small creatures with Fatal Push. So please don't play Path to Exile as your only removal spell. Also, please don't play tap lands. Celestial Colonnade, Creeping Tar Pit are unplayable in this format, more or less. They're obviously not as bad as I'm trying to paint them, but also for the sake of you, and by you I mean people who want to play Colonnade again, they are unplayable. They are unplayable, and don't play them. Please, 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 please. Castles, on the other hand, are very good. Castle Vanches was super good for me so far, and I've been really impressed with it. And I think moving forward, this is the better utility land by miles than like Tar Pit or whatever. This has a bit of a caveat, because in like 3+ color decks, you will still play Triumphs. So if you're playing Jeskai, for example, you should play Roaring Triumph or whatever else it's called. If you are playing like 4-color decks for some reason still, I've seen Magwinsos is playing this Jeskai Nahiri deck with Omnath and Renan 6, and it looked horrendously to me. Like not that it's bad, but it just looks so ugly, and it's completely not my style of deck. But he said that he thinks that castles are better overall as well, but he actually needed a man land, because he needed a dual land to tie his mana base together. So yeah, if you need to cover all your bases color wise, then feel free to play tap lands if they give more than one color. But if you have the luxury of playing monocolored utility lands like in 2-color decks, please play castles over Colonnade or Tar Pit, especially in blue-white. People want to play Colonnade, but you have 2 great castles in blue-white. I don't think Castle Locthwain is that great, because you don't want to lose life in this like blue-black control deck. But in blue-white, you have Castle Vanches and Castle Ardenvale, and these are both very, very good, and please play them. They were very overshadowed by Sanctuary, of course, because you needed islands in your deck, and now you don't. So we've never really had a format without Sanctuary, but with castles. So I think people are still warming up to them, and they don't fully appreciate it, or them. Probably, well, another thing that I think is probably needed is sweepers, because you no longer have Cryptic Loop, so you need to actually deal with a swath of creatures. You can't just buy time indefinitely, unless your deck has something like Nahiri with Emrakul or Scapeshift. If you're just playing a control deck, you need to sweep the board, so run sweepers. I have one Damnation in the main deck, and the second one in the sideboard in this list, as you can see. Playing 2 Damnation in the main deck is probably okay as well, depends. Like, this is my hedge for now, and depends on how aggressive the format and how many go-white decks will be there. I might adjust if I want second Damnation in the main deck as well. But you need to have them in your 75 at least. And I think at least one main deck. Another thing is that I think 2-color mana base is back to being an extremely desirable quality of your deck. Because you can play a mana base that's not as painful as like 10 fetchlands mana base, because you don't have Uro anymore. You can't just pad your life total with Uro. You will actually face the consequences of playing 3 shocklands and 10 fetchlands or whatever else you've played before. You should just tune this mana base to every single list. I don't believe there is a cookie cutter mana base anymore, as I've believed for a very, very long time with 2-color decks. Like, for example, in blue-black, it's so hard to figure out how the mana should look like. I'm somewhat pleased with my mana base, but still there are some things that I would change. For example, I don't like that I have 7 fetchables, and with 7 fetchlands, I would like to cut 1 fetchland for another fetchable. But on the other hand, I still want to have enough turn 1 black sources for Fatal Push. You still have to mind stuff like Archmage's Charm and other stuff. So, as you can see, it's very, very hard to figure out the mana base. The only 3-color decks I would really consider are Nahiri decks. I don't really like that Nahiri has 2 bad colors, which is white and red. You can't play Fatal Push, but you can supplement your removal suite with bolts and helixes, so it's probably a bit better, because bolt is better than Path to Exile, I believe. And there are some nice things about Nahiri. For example, if someone is still playing Mill, you have a Miracle in your deck, or Nahiri can exile Heliod, which is actually pretty big game, I think. So I just wouldn't splash a color unless it gives you something very unique. So, for example, I think, and I've talked to people who wanted to splash Teferi, Hero of the Minaria, into blue-black. I don't think it's that great. I think that making your mana significantly worse is just not worth it, unless you are getting an entirely new dimension, which is, for example, this Nahiri combo kill. And like, the last thing about this short control rant is that there are a lot of unknowns still there, because the format is not even week old, and this whole video might look dumb in week or 2, and I might get some things wrong, but I truly believe that what I'm saying right now is how it will go. So, closing on, I'm going for almost 25 minutes at this point. I just want to throw some remarks about this blue-black deck. As I've said before, the mana is tremendously hard to figure out, but I'm somewhat pleased with where I landed so far. Some cards that are, I think all main deck cards are fairly self-explanatory. There isn't anything super out of place. For Snapcaster Mages, Snapcaster's once again very good, especially with in a deck with so many cheap spells. So Snapcaster fans rejoice. And in the sideboard, Tasiguru might turn some heads around, I think, but it's, I believe, pretty decent way to have a cheap body against aggressive decks, so you don't have to remove every single creature, but you can stabilize with it. Plus, it's a source of clock and some sort of card advantage against like slower decks, but it's mostly a 1 mana 4/5 with a mana sink on top of it. So it's not like a. The purpose of Tasigur isn't to be a grindy tool because its activated ability isn't that great. It's obviously better than not having one. That's why I'm playing Tasigur over Germak Angler. But its main purpose is to double spell early on and stabilize the ground. I don't want to play any creatures in the main deck because I don't want to turn on my opponent's removal spells, and it's not very good with Damnation. And I frankly don't think you need it in general, and like just to close out the game. So I think the main deck is pretty coherent, and that's why I don't want to play any creatures in there, except from obviously Snapcaster Mage. Then I think, as I've said before, Surgical Extraction will probably be needed once more. Playing stuff like Nihil Spellbomb or Leyline is pretty bad with Drown in the Lock, so I think you need this pinpoint Graveyard Hate. So Cling is good, Surgical is good, and if you overload on these, as you can see, I have 5 in my deck list with 4 Snapcaster Mage. I think you can come on top of Dredge fairly often. Plus, Surgical Extraction is somewhat nice with Thought Scour. You can just cheese your opponent by milling them and then Surgicaling, for example, their Tronland or whatever. But don't be too overeager with Surgical, of course. I don't even know if it's good against Tron. It's probably bad versus E-Tron and maybe good versus Green Tron. I haven't played against Green Tron with this deck yet, so I haven't seen if the sideboard plan leaves you with enough bad cards in the main deck that you can just put Surgical in. But at the first glance, I would say that you cut Fatal Pushes and Clings because they have Relics. Surgical is also bad against Relic, which makes sense. It obviously makes sense, but it makes Surgical a bit worse. But I would say that you cut Fatal Pushes, you can add Tasigur, you can add Click, Borrower. So probably Surgical or 2 will make the cut against Tron in this specific matchup. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is Pithing Needle. I think this card is pretty great against Heliod, provided you can beat Infinite Life. So if you have Raise the Mind Sculptor, if you have Nahiri with Emrakul, if you have Teferi, Hero of the Minaria, or any other sort of way to beat Infinite Life, Ballista is your only problem or your only concern in Heliod decks, so you can just Pithing Needle the Ballista and then you're way safer. It's obviously not a guaranteed win if you Needle Ballista, but it will allow you to operate with much more freedom because you don't need to be super scared. They can obviously still kill you with Spike Feeder plus Conclave Mentor or just by beating you down with creatures. But as soon as you are safe from Ballista, the game is way easier to pilot. So yeah, I think that's it. It's almost 30 minutes into the video. So these were my first impressions on the new Modern. This is the deck. The blue-black control deck is the deck I think will be the best control deck in the format. Don't play Kolaghan's Command. There's no reason to splash it and make your mana terrible. Just keep it simple, keep it elegant, keep it 2 colors. Blue-black, blue-white, red Nahiri might be good as well. So yeah, that's it for me today. And I'm gonna see you on Monday. Or if you don't watch my streams for some reason because you work or whatever, I will see you next week in the next episode. So yeah, take care and bye bye.